So first, thank you for coming. Thank you for Nino and for the libraries of Leiden for making this accessible. It's a huge project in terms of scanning, etc., which is achieved already some major achievements by letting us see the entire collection and not just the books. And the thing is that the books, in Israel at least, are very well known. And we know his work for years. And just 2 months ago, when I was able to see the entire collection of the negatives, I could really see the difference between the book, which tells a very specific story about Palestine, about the Bible, maybe about Jaffa, and the entire collection. And the collection can be read in several ways. And what's very unique with his work is that he actually connected with so many people, and we can tell their story or try now to retell the stories of a lost world. So, I do it like that, okay. So, first I would like to start with 2 photos that were not taken by Frank Scholten, because for me there is also a very personal perspective on the contents of this collection. And my personal story actually starts in 1842, when one of my ancestors, his name was Avraham Shlush, he immigrated to Jaffa from Morocco. And his son, Aaron, you see it on the left here, became quite a prominent public figure in the Jewish community of Jaffa. They settled in Jaffa. And he was a goldsmith, a money changer, and also since the mid-1870s, he started acquiring land, because he foresaw that Jaffa is going to develop quite rapidly, and he thought that real estate will be the next business of Jaffa, which turned out to be quite true. Now, I want to talk not about Aaron, but rather about his son, one of his sons, Yosef Eliyahu Shlush. And he was born in Jaffa in 1870, so he's a native of Jaffa. He was a relentless entrepreneur throughout his life. And he began his professional career in the 1890s by importing building products and accessories from Europe. This actually reflects the transition of Jaffa since the 1880s. So Jaffa was becoming, let's say, going out of a place in history where it is just the gate to the Holy Land to becoming a city of its own. And soon after he began his business, he also set up a small workshop for producing cement tiles with his elder brother Avraham Chaim, and they had a company together called Shlush Frere, which shows the Levantine attitude of them both. Actually, their mother tongue was Arabic, but they also were fluent in French. They were like French citizens, so to speak, in the Ottoman Empire. And this workshop soon became one of the main 2 factories in Palestine for all kinds of prefabricated concrete elements for buildings. The company was also importing and selling Portland cement, which you can see here in one of his Scholten's photo. And by the way, you can see here also the factory, and this is personal knowledge. So for me, it was a great surprise and much excitement to see actually how it looks like. And this entire enterprise actually was part of, as I said, the entire building boom, and cement became, by the turn of the century, an important commodity in Jaffa of that time. Now, during the first decade of the 20th century, Yosef Eliyahu Shlush also became an important building contractor, and he was involved in the construction of several public buildings in Jaffa, as well as in the construction of about half of the first houses of Tel Aviv. Now, it's important to stress that Tel Aviv, in its beginning, which was 1909, was a neighborhood in northern Jaffa. It was not a separate city. He eventually became a well-known public figure in Jaffa and Tel Aviv alike, and was involved in many public initiatives in the two cities. This is where his own story meets the photographs of Frank Scholten, because two of Scholten's photographs were included without proper credit, of course, in Shlush's memoir, published in Hebrew in 1931. The first photo you see here was a photo of Shlush as a member of the executive committee of the Jaffa municipality in 1922. And the second one, from quite the same time, the same year, shows Shlush as a member of the executive committee of Tel Aviv, which shows how he was quite in playing two roles in the same time simultaneously. Now, the negatives of these two photos are now scanned, as you can see, and can be accessed online. The Jaffa photo was included in Scholten's published book, but the Tel Aviv photo that you see here was not, because the book tried to probably move away from the story of Tel Aviv altogether. And actually, through this process of scanning here in Leiden, I have first learned that this photo that I know for ages, the photo from the book, is actually Scholten's photo. Now, here you would probably want to ask, how come Tel Aviv had its own municipality already in 1922? And as you remember, I just told you that it was founded as a neighborhood in Jaffa just a decade before, in 1909. And to very, very quickly and shortly answer this, I have to give you some overview of Jaffa and its development since the 1870s. Until then, Jaffa was just a small port town with vast agricultural hinterland that was mainly used for growing citrus fruits for export. The town's wealth was based on the growing European demand for oranges, which in turn attracted newcomers from all around the Middle East and beyond. And because of the economic importance of these vast agricultural lands, Jaffa's urban area could expand only to non-agricultural lands to meet its population growth. Most of the development potential was therefore concentrated to the north of the historic city, which you see here. And this area was mainly area of sand dunes that were practically unfit for agricultural cultivation of anything. And Tel Aviv, and here you see Tel Aviv on the right, was part of this northern expansion of Jaffa since the beginning of the 20th century. At the same time, Tel Aviv was also a different kind of a neighborhood because it was also an ideological enterprise that, while providing better housing conditions for its members, was also interested in promoting a cultural project that was meant in the end to become the first Hebrew city in the world. And during Ottoman times, this ambition had very little chances to become a reality, but after the British occupation of Palestine in 1918, and more specifically after the British civilian administration began its work in Palestine in July 1920, Tel Aviv leaders were working hard to become an autonomous municipal entity. So they wanted to divide themselves from Jaffa. And this was actually accomplished in May 1921 when Tel Aviv became what was called a township, largely independent from Jaffa. It had its own defined territory, borders, and large enough empty land reserves ready for development. And this is what's important about Scholten. He comes to Palestine just at that very moment, and somehow against his own intentions of finding the Bible in Palestine, he witnessed and documented these early moments of the spatial division and hyper-development of what would become the city of Tel Aviv, Jaffa, as it's called today. What is interesting about Scholten's photos is that he freely moved between Arab and Jewish leaders in Jaffa and Tel Aviv, while probably not fully grasping the historic change that was starting to take shape. In retrospect, we can read the signs of what was at stake through his photos. For example, here, he photographed in the office of Jaffa's mayor, Assem Beke Said, and Scholten's photos shows a photograph of the Dome of the Rock, here just hanging above his head. Of course, the Dome of the Rock, or Al-Haram al-Sharif, is probably the holiest place for Islam in Palestine. Now, when Scholten came to visit Meir Dizengoff, who was the head of Tel Aviv at that time, Scholten captured a somewhat similar picture hanging on the wall, with one major difference, because the picture did not show the Dome of the Rock, but rather a model of what it had replaced, which is the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. The Jewish temple was destroyed by the Romans and became a symbol of Jewish independence and also Jewish exile by the time. And this shows that, the contest over space was already taking place in the minds of the people. And this we can tell just because we have these very, very unique photos. We cannot be sure whether Scholten really grasped these aspects of the competition over space, because he was an outsider, he was a foreigner, and he was probably not really familiar with all the history. At the same time, he did document, with clear interest, by the way, the first steps of this competition as it was unfolding. And here, for example, is a photo he took in 1921 from a roof of a small hotel he probably stayed in Tel Aviv. And 2 years later, shooting from the same roof, the once almost non-existing street has become the new main street of Tel Aviv, named after General Edmund Allenby, the British general who led the British conquest of Palestine a few years before. Scholten did not remain in Jaffa nor in Tel Aviv to watch the next episodes of this story, and I'm afraid we don't have really the time right now to go into the details. We can open this up for discussion later. And when he eventually published his books on Jaffa, Jaffa was already a very different city than the one that he had left in 1923. Yet what Scholten left us with is a rare documentation of a moment in time when divisions and distinctions and borders we now take for granted were only starting to take their shape, and therefore historical reading of his photos may help us understand what constitutes the identity or identities of these urban concentration, what entered the accepted history, but also what was left outside this history, and this is what I see as the major significance of this collection, as it is. Okay. Done. Thank you. You're welcome.
Can you put my mic back on? So you can actually, if you want to stay with me, I would be really happy. Thanks. Don't go away yet. Or thanks for giving us this perspective and also giving us insight in the historical reading and how important this is. So I wanted to ask you about one specific thing, actually. And Guy already mentioned the fact that one of the aims could be to make some sort of map, some sort of digital map. And I read that you also work, and I'm going to read it because I want to make it correct. You work at the Big Data in Architectural Research Lab.
Yes.
It's a long title, so I want to make sure that it's
That's
correct.
my research lab at the Technion, yes.
Yeah, so you're head of research there. And I was interested in how you could combine all these different elements that we just saw. So we have the metadata, we have the georeference possibilities, we have the photographs, and there's the map.
Well,
How could all
we're
these
trying
things come
to
together?
concentrate, because I'm coming from architecture and
Yeah,
urban history. We are much into mapping and maps. And actually, when you start putting together everything that has some relation to a place on a map, not just Scholten's photos, but other photos before Scholten's, after Scholten, you're starting to understand how time progresses, how a certain urban space changes over time.
you can create some sort of timeline as well.
I can create, and the most important thing, it's a democratic platform. So you can, first of all, put everything on it, and you have to decide which story you're going to tell out of it.
It's always curated somehow.
It's always curated,
Yeah.
but for an archivist, he always wants to put everything in front and let the researchers or anybody else to tell the stories. Another option by doing this is starting getting information back from the public. And this is something that is rarely done, especially when you're talking about libraries and establishments that hold their metadata in a very strict order. This is something that we're now trying to overcome and trying to develop a system where everybody can actually look at these photos, suggest extra information, not just place-related information, but more importantly, some data about what we're seeing, what are the events, who are the people maybe. But
People could also give suggestions or add things to it, perhaps.
Yes. I have my own experience, maybe a very frustrating experience.
Yeah. with the same sort of projects, or?
With a similar project that started about 20 years ago, when we found photos of my grandfather from the 30s in Palestine. And he was actually quite eccentric as Scholten, not as systematic as Scholten. And he actually traveled the entire country. He documented life of Arabs and Jews. Like he didn't care about anybody because he also had money. And we didn't have anything written about this. And we had to travel. This was about almost 20 years ago. We had to travel to places and try gaining some information about photos that we actually had no clue about, just by showing them to people, screening them to gatherings of people. And for me, it was a very frustrating experience and very time-consuming. I think that we're now in a stage that we can do it in a more efficient way, and also open this up for the entire world, not just people that I happen to know in Israel.
Yeah, but really make sure that everyone can join in.
Yes.